30. Experts failed, but the maid solved it in 50 seconds. The mafia boss was shocked. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's jump right back in. The Emerald Diner's fluorescent lights hummed over red leather booths at 2:47 a.m., casting harsh shadows across checkered floors where exhaustion pooled like spilled coffee. Serafina Winters moved through her shift on autopilot, clearing plates with hands that trembled from 18-hour workdays, 3 jobs, and a fear that never slept. Her feet ached in worn sneakers that should have been replaced 6 months ago, but replacement meant $20 she needed for Tobias's medication instead. On the television mounted above the counter, the late-night news played footage of a cryptocurrency exchange collapse. Numbers scrolled across the screen in patterns most people saw as random chaos, just another financial disaster in a world full of them. The anchor droned about $847 million vanishing without a trace. About 30 experts from the most prestigious firms failing to locate the breach. About investors demanding answers that no one could provide. But Serafina saw something else entirely. Her hands stilled mid-wipe on table 7, her mathematical mind calculating trajectories she couldn't fully explain. The transaction timestamps weren't random at all. They followed a Fibonacci sequence, hidden so elegantly that conventional auditing software would never catch it. The amounts corresponded to prime number distributions. Someone had built a mathematical backdoor so beautiful it was almost art, and they were using it to funnel money through 17 shell corporations in precisely timed intervals. 50 seconds. That was all it took for her to understand the entire architecture of the theft while holding a dish rag and a half-empty ketchup bottle. She had no idea that seated 3 booths away, watching her with predator's focus, was Constantine Ravencroft, the man who owned half of Portland's shadows, whose steel blue eyes had watched empires crumble, whose security team of 30 experts had failed to find what this exhausted waitress just solved without even trying. He had come to the diner to think, to escape the suffocating failure of his organization, and instead he had just witnessed something impossible. When Serafina's shift ended at 4:30 a.m., she pushed through the back door into the alley where she always parked her bicycle. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective under the single working streetlight. She was fumbling for her lock key when a voice emerged from the darkness, smooth and dangerous as black ice. "You saw something on that television, didn't you?" Serafina spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man from booth 6 stood 10 feet away, hands in the pockets of an expensive black coat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and those unsettling blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her, beyond her skin and into her thoughts. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, gripping her pepper spray keychain. "I was just cleaning tables." Constantine smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who had cornered something small and fragile. "Don't insult my intelligence, Miss Winters. Or should I say, Serafina Marie Winters, age 26, born in Seattle, former MIT scholarship recipient who dropped out after 2 years, currently working 3 jobs to support your 19-year-old brother Tobias, who suffers from Batten disease and has approximately 6 months to live without treatment that costs $680,000. The blood drained from Serafina's face. "How do you know that? Who are you?" "My name is Constantine Ravencroft, and the exchange you were analyzing on that television belongs to me. Or rather, someone has been stealing from it for the past 8 months. and 30 of the most expensive security consultants in the country cannot tell me how. He took a step closer, and Serafina found she couldn't move. But you figured it out in less than a minute while wiping down a table. That's impossible. I couldn't have seen enough detail to actually know anything. Yet you did. I watched your eyes tracking the numbers. I saw the exact moment you understood the pattern. You have a gift, Miss Winters, and I need that gift. Serafina's grip tightened on her pepper spray. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. I'm not selling anything. I'm offering you a job. Work for me as a financial analyst. Salary of $300,000 per year. Full medical benefits including coverage for Tobias's experimental treatment, and a signing bonus of $200,000. Enough to save your brother's life. The world tilted beneath Serafina's feet. $200,000. It was a fantasy number, something that existed only in other people's realities. What's the catch? The catch is that you'll be working for a criminal organization. The Ravencroft family doesn't file tax returns or operate within legal boundaries. We deal in information, leverage, and occasionally violence. But we honor our contracts, and we protect what belongs to us. Constantine pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. You have 24 hours to decide. Come to this address tomorrow night at 8 p.m. if you want to save your brother. Don't come if you'd rather watch him die on principle. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into a black sedan that pulled up at the mouth of the alley. Serafina stood there in the rain-soaked darkness, staring at the card in her trembling hand. The address was embossed in silver ink, elegant and terrifying. She didn't sleep when she got home to the tiny apartment she shared with Tobias. Instead, she sat at their kitchen table, watching her brother's labored breathing from the mattress in the corner. His medication bottles lined the windowsill like a pharmacy display, each one representing a small fortune she had scraped together through brutal work and desperate sacrifice. The experimental treatment he needed was offered at only one clinic in the world, and they required full payment up front. She had saved $11,000 in 2 years. At her current rate, Tobias would be dead long before she reached even a tenth of what was needed. Constantine Ravencroft was offering her a devil's bargain, trading her soul for her brother's life. At 9:30 a.m., while Tobias was still sleeping, Serafina's phone rang. It was Leo Caruso, the loan shark she had borrowed $5,000 from 8 months ago when Tobias's last hospitalization had nearly bankrupted them. Leo's interest rates were criminal, and he had been calling twice a week demanding payment she couldn't make. She answered with dread pooling in her stomach. Hello? Silence, then heavy breathing, then nothing. The call disconnected. Leo never called without making threats. Never called without reminding her exactly what would happen if she didn't pay. 2 hours later, while she was trying to force down breakfast she couldn't taste, she received a text from her friend Maya, who worked at the diner. Did you hear? They found Leo Caruso's loan office completely cleaned out this morning. All the records gone, all the money gone, Leo himself missing. Police have no leads. Serafina's hands went numb. Constantine Ravencroft was showing her exactly what his protection meant. He had erased her debt without being asked, eliminated a threat she hadn't mentioned, and demonstrated power that made her previous life look like a child's game. The message was clear. Accept his offer, and nothing would ever hurt her again. Refuse, and she would be alone against a world that had already taken everything from her, except Tobias. She looked at her brother sleeping peacefully, his face still holding traces of the boy he had been before disease started stealing him piece by piece. She thought about her mother dying because they couldn't afford better treatment. She thought about her father's death in a convenience store robbery when she was 8, killed for $73 in the register. The world had never been fair. The world had never cared about her principles or her innocence. Perhaps it was time to stop pretending that morality paid medical bills. Serafina picked up Constantine's card and knew, with the same mathematical certainty that had solved his impossible problem, that she would be standing at his door in exactly 34.5 hours. The devil was offering salvation, and she was too desperate to refuse. Ravencroft Tower stood in downtown Portland like a monument to power that didn't apologize for itself. 48 stories of dark glass and steel that reflected the city back at itself with cold indifference. Serafina stood on the sidewalk at 7:55 p.m., staring up at the building that would either save her brother's life or destroy what remained of her soul. She wore the only professional outfit she owned, a gray skirt and white blouse she had bought from a thrift store 3 years ago for a job interview that never panned out. Next to the impeccably dressed executives flowing through the revolving doors, she looked like exactly what she was, a waitress pretending to belong in a world that had never wanted her. She took a breath that tasted like fear and walked inside. The lobby was all polished granite and recessed lighting, the kind of calculated elegance that whispered money so old it didn't need to shout. A security guard at the main desk looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to thinly veiled contempt in the time it took him to assess her cheap clothing and nervous energy. "I have an appointment with Constantine Ravencroft," Serafina said, hating how small her voice sounded in the cavernous space. The guard's eyebrows rose in obvious disbelief. "Name?" "Serafina Winters." He tapped at his computer with the enthusiasm of someone convinced they were about to expose a liar. Then his expression changed completely. His posture straightened, and something like fear flickered across his face. "Top floor. The private elevator on the right. It's already been authorized for you." Serafina walked to the elevator he indicated, feeling his eyes tracking her every step. The doors opened the moment she approached, revealing an interior of mirrors and dark wood that smelled like leather and expensive cologne. There was only one button, and it was already lit. The ascent took 45 seconds. Serafina watched the numbers climb and felt like she was rising toward either salvation or damnation, possibly both. When the doors opened, she stepped directly into an office that occupied the entire top floor of the building. The space was open and modern, with walls of windows revealing Portland's nighttime skyline spread out like scattered diamonds. Constantine stood near those windows, hands clasped behind his back, silhouetted against the city lights. "You came," he said without turning around. "You knew I would." "I hoped. There's a difference." He turned to face her, and in the low lighting his features looked carved from shadow and bone. "Welcome to Ravencroft Tower, Miss Winters. This will be your new home for the next several years, assuming you survive the first week." Before Serafina could ask what that meant, a door to her right opened, and a man entered who looked like violence wrapped in human skin. He was tall and broad, with close-cropped dark hair, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, and eyes the color of smoke. Everything about him radiated controlled lethality, from his military bearing to the way his hand rested casually near his jacket, where Serafina was certain a weapon waited. "This is Kieran Drake," Constantine said. "My head of operations and the person you'll report to when I'm unavailable. Kieran, this is Serafina Winters, our new analyst." Kieran studied her with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential threat or asset, nothing in between. The waitress who solved the meridian problem in under a minute. The math prodigy who was cleaning tables because life is brutally unfair, Constantine corrected. There's a difference. Can she shoot? Kieran asked, as if Serafina wasn't standing right there. I don't need her to shoot. I need her to think. A woman's voice cut through the conversation like a blade wrapped in silk. How practical. Another stray you're bringing into the house, Constantine. I hope this one is at least house-trained. Serafina turned to see a woman gliding through the same door Kieran had used. She was probably in her mid-30s, beautiful in a way that seemed engineered rather than natural, with platinum blonde hair pulled into an intricate twist and wearing a dress that cost more than Serafina's entire annual income. Her smile was warm, but her green eyes were calculating and cold. Serafina, meet Tatiana Ravencroft, Constantine said, and Serafina caught the subtle tension in his voice. My late brother's widow and head of our investment division. How charming, Tatiana said, circling Serafina like a shark evaluating prey. Tell me, dear, do you have any actual credentials, or are we basing your entire value on a lucky guess you made while wiping down tables? It wasn't luck, Serafina said quietly. The theft pattern followed a Fibonacci sequence with prime number distribution masking. The thief used 17 shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, routing transactions at precisely calculated intervals to avoid triggering automated fraud detection. They've been stealing from the Meridian Exchange for 8 months, taking between $40,000 and $60,000 per transaction, always within 36 hours of major market fluctuations when the activity would be hardest to trace. Your head of security, whoever they are, missed it because they were looking for large, suspicious transfers instead of mathematically elegant small ones. The room fell silent. Tatiana's smile had frozen on her face. Kieran's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching respect. Constantine looked like he wanted to smile but was restraining himself. As I said, Constantine murmured, she thinks. Another figure appeared in the doorway. This one, a man in his 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of polished appearance that came from expensive tailoring and regular gym memberships. Did I hear someone critiquing my security protocols? His voice was smooth, but Serafina caught the edge of hostility beneath it. Serafina, this is Damien Ashford, our head of security. Damien, this is the woman who solved in 50 seconds what your team couldn't solve in 3 days. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Beginner's luck combined with an overly simplified analysis. Real security work requires understanding infrastructure, personnel protocols, and threat assessment, not just looking at pretty patterns on a television screen. Then perhaps you should have spent less time on infrastructure and more time on mathematical analysis, Serafina said before she could stop herself. The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by exhaustion and the weight of too many people looking at her like she was an intruder in their perfect world. Damien's eyes narrowed, and Serafina realized she had just made her first enemy. How delightful, another voice said from behind her, feminine and cold as winter glass. The hired help has opinions. Serafina turned to see a woman standing in the elevator she had just exited. A woman so stunning she seemed to pull all the light in the room toward herself. She had jet black hair cascading over bare shoulders, flawless porcelain skin, and violet eyes that looked at Serafina with the kind of contempt usually reserved for insects found in expensive food. The diamond ring on her left hand caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls, a ring so large it could have paid for Tobias's entire treatment twice over. And this, Constantine said, something indefinable crossing his face. Is Vivian Ashford, Damien's sister, and my fiancée. The word hit Serafina like a physical blow, though she couldn't explain why. She had known nothing about this man 24 hours ago. His personal life was none of her business. Yet something in her chest twisted painfully at the way Vivian moved to Constantine's side, possessive and confident, placing a manicured hand on his arm like claiming territory. "Your fiancé?" Serafina repeated, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Congratulations!" "We're to be married in 3 months," Vivian said, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "A union of 2 powerful families. I'm sure someone of your background can understand the importance of strategic alliances, even if you'll never participate in one yourself." Kieran cleared his throat, and Serafina caught the warning look he shot Vivian. Even Tatiana seemed uncomfortable with the naked hostility. Constantine's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried an edge when he spoke. "Vivian, perhaps you should join us for dinner later. Right now, I'm conducting business." "Of course, darling." Vivian leaned in and kissed Constantine's cheek, her eyes on Serafina the entire time, a predator marking territory. Then she swept back into the elevator and disappeared. The silence that followed felt like the aftermath of an explosion. "Your office is on the 45th floor, Constantine said, as if nothing had happened. "Kieran will show you to it and provide you with security clearance. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., you'll begin reviewing our financial systems. You'll report any anomalies directly to me. Welcome to the Ravencroft family, Miss Winters. Try not to die in your first week." The words echoed in Serafina's mind as she sat alone in her new office 3 floors below, staring at 5 computer monitors displaying enough encrypted financial data to give most analysts a migraine. It was 9:45 p.m. on her 3rd day, and she had barely scratched the surface of the labyrinth Constantine had given her access to. The Ravencroft empire was far more complex than she had imagined. A sprawling network of legitimate businesses fronting illegal operations, money flowing through channels so intricate they resembled neural pathways in a living brain. She had found 2 more vulnerabilities in the first 48 hours. Small cracks in the system where money could leak if someone knew where to look. Nothing as dramatic as the Meridian breach, but significant enough that she had written detailed reports and sent them directly to Constantine as instructed. He had responded within minutes each time with a single word: "Good." Now she was chasing something bigger, a pattern she couldn't quite define yet, transactions that looked legitimate on the surface, but felt wrong in ways her mathematical intuition recognized before her conscious mind could articulate. She was so absorbed in tracking the data trail that she didn't hear the door open behind her. "You're still here." Serafina jumped, spinning in her chair to find Constantine standing in the doorway. He had removed his jacket and loosened his tie, looking less like the terrifying mafia boss and more like an exhausted businessman at the end of a brutal day. "I was just finishing something," she said, minimizing the screens reflexively. "Don't hide your work from me. I pay you to be paranoid about my money, not to be paranoid about me seeing you be paranoid about my money." He walked to her desk and studied the monitors with the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. "What did you find?" "Maybe nothing. Maybe something significant. There are quarterly transfers from your real estate division to a consulting firm in the Cayman Islands. The amounts vary, but they always occur within 72 hours of major property acquisitions. It could be legitimate consulting fees, but the firm has no web presence, no employee records, no physical office that I can verify. It exists only as a bank account receiving money." Constantine's expression hardened. How much? Over the past 3 years, approximately $2.7 million. The silence that followed was colder than winter in the Arctic. Then Constantine pulled out his phone and made a call. Kieran, I need a full background on Meridian Consulting Group, Cayman Registry. I want to know who owns it, who manages it, and where the money goes after it arrives. I want this information within 12 hours. He hung up and looked at Serafina with something that might have been respect, or might have been calculation. You're either going to save this organization or make me kill half my executive staff. I haven't decided which outcome I prefer. I'm just doing what you hired me to do. No, you're doing far more than that. He glanced at his watch, then at her. Have you eaten? The question caught her off guard. I had a protein bar around 4 p.m. That's not food. That's an insult to the concept of nutrition. Come with me. Before Serafina could protest, Constantine was walking toward the elevator. She followed because refusing seemed both rude and potentially dangerous. They rode up to his office in silence, and when the doors opened, she saw that someone had set up a small table near the windows with takeout containers and 2 place settings. I ordered from the Emerald Diner, Constantine said, gesturing for her to sit. I thought you might appreciate something familiar. Serafina stared at the containers bearing the logo of her former workplace and felt something crack in her chest. You ordered from my old job. I eat there sometimes. The coffee is terrible, but the food is honest, which is rare in my world. He sat across from her and began opening containers. Turkey sandwich, sweet potato fries, and apple pie. That's what you always ordered on your break. I noticed. You've been watching me for a while, haven't you? I've been watching everyone. That's how you survive in my position. But yes, I noticed you specifically about 6 months ago. You were reading a book on advanced probability theory during your break, and I thought it was either a very strange choice for a waitress or evidence of something more interesting beneath the surface. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Serafina found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of sharing a meal with a man who probably had killed more people than she had met in her entire life. Finally, Constantine spoke again, his voice quieter than she had heard it before. I didn't want any of this. The empire, the violence, the constant chess game where people die if I make the wrong move. I wanted to be an architect. I had a portfolio ready for submission to design schools. Sketches of buildings that would never exist because my father was murdered when I was 25 and everything changed. Serafina looked up from her sandwich, startled by the confession. He was shot during dinner at our family restaurant, Constantine continued, staring out at the city lights. 3 bullets to the chest from a rival family trying to start a war. He died in my arms, telling me I had to be strong, had to take control, had to become the thing I swore I would never be. I had 72 hours to consolidate power or watch everything he built collapse and everyone loyal to our family get slaughtered in the chaos that followed. So I became a monster because the alternative was letting monsters destroy everyone I cared about. I'm sorry, Serafina said softly. That's an impossible choice to make at 25. What about you? You had an MIT scholarship. You were supposed to be working on Wall Street or teaching at some prestigious university, not serving coffee at 3 in the morning. What destroyed your dreams? Serafina set down her sandwich, her appetite suddenly gone. She had never told this story to anyone outside her family. But something about the way Constantine had opened himself made her want to match his vulnerability with her own. When I was 12, I convinced my parents to let me drive our car in an empty parking lot. I thought I was mature enough to handle it, Thought I understood the mechanics from watching. I accelerated too fast, panicked, hit a concrete barrier. Tobias was in the back seat. He hit his head hard enough that we spent 6 hours in the emergency room. The doctor said he was fine, just a mild concussion, but 8 months later he started having seizures. That's when they diagnosed the Batten disease. That wasn't your fault, Constantine said. Batten disease is genetic. The car accident didn't cause it. I know that logically, but I also know that trauma can trigger genetic conditions to manifest earlier or more severely. I keep thinking that if I hadn't been so arrogant, so convinced I could handle something I wasn't ready for, maybe Tobias would have had more time. Maybe he would have had a normal childhood before the disease started taking him apart. So you sacrificed your future to try to save his. Wouldn't you have done the same? Constantine smiled sadly. I sacrificed my future to save people I barely knew. You sacrificed yours for someone you love. I think your choice was braver. They talked until 2:30 in the morning, sharing stories about mothers lost to addiction and overdose, about the weight of responsibility that crushed dreams, about the strange isolation of being the only person holding everything together when the world kept trying to tear it apart. For the first time since entering Constantine's world, Serafina didn't feel like an outsider pretending to belong. She felt like someone who understood the cost of survival because she had paid it in the same currency, everything she used to be. What neither of them noticed was Vivian standing in the shadows of the outer office, watching them through the glass walls, with eyes full of cold calculation and growing hatred. The call came at 6:15 a.m. while Serafina was getting ready for work, her phone vibrating with the special ringtone she had set for Tobias. She answered before the second ring, her heart already racing because her brother never called this early unless something was desperately wrong. Sarah. His voice was barely a whisper, tight with pain. I can't breathe right. My chest hurts so bad. She heard the phone clatter against something hard, then silence. Serafina was out the door in 30 seconds, still wearing one shoe and clutching her keys in shaking hands. She found Tobias collapsed on the bathroom floor of their apartment, his lips tinged blue, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow gasps, like a drowning man fighting for air. She called 911 while cradling his head in her lap, and the 6 minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive felt like 6 hours of watching her brother die in slow motion. At Portland General Hospital, the emergency room doctor spoke in the clipped, efficient language of someone delivering terrible news multiple times per day. Tobias's heart was failing faster than anyone had predicted. He needed emergency surgery to stabilize him, but even that was just buying time. Without the experimental treatment, he had weeks at most, possibly days. Serafina sat in the surgical waiting area with paperwork she couldn't afford to sign and decisions she wasn't qualified to make. The surgery would cost $68,000, and her insurance would cover maybe 30%. She had $11,000 in savings and no way to find the rest. She was still trying to figure out how to tell the hospital she couldn't pay when Kieran appeared beside her like a ghost materializing from smoke. The boss is handling it, he said simply. All of it. Surgery, hospital stay, medications, everything. It's already been arranged. I can't accept that. I can't owe him that much. You don't owe him anything. He's doing this because he wants to, not because he expects repayment. Kieran's scarred face softened almost imperceptibly. Let someone help you for once, Winters. You don't have to carry everything alone. 4 hours into the surgery, Constantine arrived. He walked into the waiting room still wearing the same clothes from the night before, looking like he hadn't slept, and sat down beside Serafina without a word. She stared at him in disbelief. "You don't need to be here. I know you have meetings, important things to do. I canceled them." He leaned back in the uncomfortable plastic chair and closed his eyes. "There's nothing more important than this." They sat together through the remaining 11 hours of surgery, occasionally talking, mostly silent. Constantine brought her coffee that tasted like industrial waste and sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria that she couldn't force herself to eat. He didn't offer false comfort or optimistic predictions. He simply existed beside her, solid and unmoving, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. At 8:30 p.m., the surgeon emerged looking exhausted, but cautiously optimistic. The surgery had been successful. Tobias was stable and being moved to the cardiac intensive care unit. He would need monitoring for at least 72 hours, but the immediate crisis had passed. Serafina stood up too fast and her knees buckled. Constantine caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady and strong, and for the first time in 18 hours, she let herself cry. Not quiet tears, but the kind of raw sobbing that came from watching the person you love most hover at the edge of death and somehow survive. She buried her face against Constantine's chest and felt his hand move to the back of her head, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. "He's alive," she whispered into his shirt. "He's going to be okay. Because of you, because you didn't give up on him." They moved to the ICU waiting area, a smaller room with dimmer lights and chairs only marginally more comfortable. Constantine insisted Serafina sit while he dealt with paperwork and spoke to nurses. By midnight, she was fighting to keep her eyes open. By 1:30 a.m., she lost the fight. She woke to pale dawn light filtering through the windows and realized her head was resting on Constantine's shoulder. His arm was around her, careful and protective, and he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Something tender and conflicted, like a man discovering feelings he didn't know he was capable of having. "You stayed," she said, her voice rough from sleep and crying. "I told you I would." "You canceled meetings with international partners. Kieran told me. You were supposed to negotiate a shipping contract worth millions." "Money is replaceable. This moment isn't." His blue eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "You're not replaceable." Serafina felt something shift inside her chest, a tectonic movement of emotion she had been trying to suppress for weeks. She was in love with him, completely, irrevocably, stupidly in love with a man who killed people for a living, who operated outside every moral boundary she used to believe in, who was engaged to another woman and would marry her in less than 3 months. She pulled away from him abruptly, creating distance between them like building a wall brick by brick. "I should check on Tobias." Something flickered across Constantine's face. Hurt, maybe, or understanding. "Of course." 3 days later, when Tobias was stable enough to move to a regular room and Serafina returned to work, she overheard Vivian's voice drifting from the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and Serafina paused in the hallway, not meaning to eavesdrop but frozen by the sound of her own name. "The wedding venue is confirmed for February 14th. Valentine's Day seemed appropriately symbolic, don't you think? 300 guests, the governor will be attending, and the merger of our families will be official." Vivian's laugh was like crystal shattering. "Once Constantine and I are married, we'll need to address the staff situation. That little analyst he's so fascinated with will need to go." I won't have some infatuated waitress mooning over my husband. Serafina walked away before she could hear more. She went to her office, closed the door, and stared at the financial reports on her screens without seeing them. February 14th was 11 weeks away. 11 weeks until Constantine belonged to someone else permanently. 11 weeks until whatever fragile connection they had built shattered against the reality of political marriages and criminal alliances. She made a decision then, clean and absolute as a mathematical proof. She would keep her distance. She would be professional, efficient, and emotionally unavailable. She would save her brother's life with Constantine's money and then build walls so high that her heart couldn't reach across them to touch something it could never have. The resolution lasted exactly 4 days before Serafina discovered something that made emotional distance impossible. She was reviewing quarterly reports from Tatiana's investment division at 11:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. The office empty, except for security guards and the eternal hum of servers in the data center. Most of the numbers looked clean. Profits flowing through legitimate channels with the expected margins. But then Serafina noticed a pattern that made her skin prickle with recognition. Small transfers, never more than $15,000 at a time, flowing from Tatiana's accounts to a series of offshore holdings in the British Virgin Islands. The amounts varied just enough to avoid triggering automated fraud alerts, and the timing coincided perfectly with periods when Constantine was traveling or occupied with major operations. Someone had designed this theft to be invisible, a slow bleeding of resources that would take years to notice. Serafina pulled up 3 years of transaction history and felt her blood turn cold. The pattern went back 38 months, consistent and deliberate. Tatiana had stolen approximately $4.2 million from the Ravencroft empire, siphoning money into accounts that existed only as numbers in encrypted ledgers. But that wasn't what terrified Serafina most. When she traced where the money went after reaching the offshore accounts, she found transfers to weapons dealers, mercenary contacts, and political fixers. Tatiana wasn't just stealing, she was building an army. Serafina spent the next 6 hours documenting everything, creating an encrypted file with transaction records, account numbers, and a detailed analysis of the theft architecture. By 5:45 a.m., she had evidence solid enough to destroy Tatiana completely. She saved the file to 3 separate encrypted drives and prepared to send a copy directly to Constantine. Her hand was hovering over the send button when her office door opened. Damien Ashford stood in the doorway, his expression pleasant and professional. "Working late again, Miss Winters? You're making the rest of us look bad with your dedication." Serafina's finger moved away from the mouse. Something in Damien's tone felt wrong. Too casual for 5:45 in the morning, too interested in what she was doing. "Just finishing a report, standard financial analysis. May I see?" He walked toward her desk with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "It's not ready yet. Still needs review before I submit it." Damien's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm head of security. Everything in this building is my business, including what our analysts are working on at odd hours." He moved behind her desk before she could stop him and looked at her screens. The blood drained from his face, then rushed back in a wave of fury. "You stupid, interfering little fool! You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Serafina lunged for her phone, but Damien was faster. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise and twisted her arm behind her back. With his other hand, he reached across her keyboard and began deleting files. She watched in horror as 3 years of documented evidence vanished from her system, erased so thoroughly that even recovery software wouldn't find traces. You're going to forget everything you just saw, Damien said quietly, his breath hot against her ear. You're going to delete those backup drives, go home, and never mention this to anyone. Not Constantine, not Kieran, not even yourself. Let go of me. Seraphina's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. I'll scream. Security will come. Security answers to me. Every guard in this building does exactly what I tell them to do. He released her wrist and pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph that made her heart stop. It was Tobias, sleeping peacefully in his hospital bed. The angle suggested the photo had been taken within the last few hours. Your brother looks so peaceful, doesn't he? It would be terrible if something happened to him. Hospital equipment malfunctions all the time. Medication gets mixed up. Patients with heart conditions are so fragile. Seraphina felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You're threatening to kill my brother. I'm explaining reality. Tatiana has been planning this coup for 3 years. She has people everywhere, in hospitals, in police departments, in every institution that matters. If you tell Constantine what you found, Tobias dies. If you try to warn anyone, Tobias dies. If you do anything except destroy those backup drives and pretend this conversation never happened, your brother dies slowly and painfully while you watch. Why are you helping her? You're Constantine's head of security. Damien laughed, and the sound was bitter as poison. Constantine inherited everything because he was born first. He got the empire, the respect, the power, while the rest of us spent our lives serving him. Tatiana promised me a real position when she takes control. Second in command of the entire operation, not just the glorified bodyguard I am now. When the coup succeeds, people like you and me finally get what we deserve instead of scraps from Constantine's table. He trusts you. He gave you responsibility and authority. He gave me a leash and called it freedom. Damien stepped back, his hand resting on something under his jacket. Now delete those drives while I watch. Every file, every backup, every trace of your investigation. Seraphina's hands shook as she opened the encrypted drives and began deleting files. Each keystroke felt like betrayal, like watching the truth burn while the people she cared about walked toward a cliff they couldn't see. When the last file vanished, Damien took the drives and crushed them under his heel, grinding plastic and circuits into worthless fragments. Good girl. Now go home and remember what happens if you make the wrong choice. Your brother's life depends on your silence. Seraphina gathered her belongings with numb hands and walked to the elevator. She rode down to street level and stepped out into the cold December morning, the sun just beginning to rise over Portland's skyline. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, her mind racing through impossible calculations. If she told Constantine, Tobias died. If she stayed silent, Constantine walked into a trap that would destroy him. There was no solution where everyone survived, no equation that balanced. She thought about her brother recovering in his hospital bed, finally getting stronger after years of decline. She thought about Constantine sitting beside her through 15 hours of surgery, canceling million-dollar deals to hold her while she cried. She thought about Tatiana and Damien and Vivian plotting in shadows, building their coup on foundations of betrayal and murder. Seraphina had spent her entire life solving impossible problems by finding patterns no one else could see. Now she was trapped in a pattern with no solution, a prisoner of mathematics that refused to add up to anything except loss. The announcement came 3 days after Damien's threat, delivered in a company-wide meeting that Seraphina attended with a smile frozen on her face like a death mask. Constantine stood at the head of the conference room, looking like a man delivering his own execution sentence. His voice flat and emotionless as he told the assembled staff that his engagement party to Vivian Ashford would be held in exactly 2 weeks on December 23rd. The entire criminal underworld would be invited, along with politicians, judges, and business leaders whose cooperation kept the Ravencroft empire functioning. It would be the social event of the year, a celebration of two powerful families uniting their interests. Vivian stood beside him, radiating triumph, her hand possessive on his arm, her violet eyes scanning the room until they landed on Seraphina with unmistakable satisfaction. This was a message delivered directly to the waitress who had forgotten her place, a reminder that some men belong to dynasties rather than individuals. Seraphina sat through the meeting and said nothing. She smiled when appropriate, nodded at instructions, and carefully avoided looking at Constantine because she knew if their eyes met she would shatter into 1,000 pieces right there in front of everyone. The next 2 weeks were torture dressed in wedding planning. Everywhere Seraphina turned, she saw reminders of the approaching party. Florists delivered arrangements to the executive floor. Caterers presented menu options in the conference room. Vivian held court like a queen, discussing champagne selections and seating charts with an enthusiasm that felt like knives dragging across Seraphina's skin. Through it all, Seraphina maintained her walls, arriving at work precisely at 8 a.m. and leaving at exactly 6 p.m., speaking to Constantine only when absolutely necessary, and then only about financial reports. She watched him grow more distant too, his expression increasingly hollow as the wedding date approached. He stopped inviting her to late-night work sessions. He stopped bringing her coffee. He became the cold stranger she had met in the diner alley, all warmth extinguished like a candle drowned in water. On December 20th, 3 days before the engagement party, Kieran found Seraphina in the parking garage as she was leaving for the day. He leaned against her car with his arms crossed, looking like violence barely contained in human form, but his eyes held something unexpected: sympathy. "You're killing him," Kieran said without preamble. "This distance you're creating. He's been miserable for weeks, and it's getting worse. He's getting married in 3 days. He should be focused on his fiancée, not on me. He doesn't love her. He's never loved her. This marriage is a business transaction negotiated by his father before the man died, and Constantine has been trying to find a way out of it for 3 years. But when he looks at you, I see something I've never seen in 8 years of serving him: hope. Like maybe he finally found a reason worth breaking the contract." Seraphina felt tears threatening and forced them back through sheer willpower. His duty to his family matters more than his personal feelings. That's how his world works. Is that what you believe, or what you're telling yourself to make the pain easier? Does it matter? The result is the same either way. Kieran studied her for a long moment, then pushed off her car. "For what it's worth, I think you're both idiots choosing misery over fighting for what you want. But I respect your right to make that choice." He started to walk away, then turned back. "He asks about you constantly, wants to know if you're eating, if you're sleeping, if you seem happy. A man doesn't ask those questions about someone who's just an employee." That night at 9:15 p.m., there was a knock on Seraphina's apartment door. She opened it, expecting a neighbor or delivery driver, and instead found Constantine standing in the dingy hallway of her building, looking absurdly out of place in his expensive coat among the peeling paint and flickering lights. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Seraphina stepped aside because refusing seemed impossible. Constantine entered her tiny apartment, and she watched his eyes take in everything. The cramped single room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen combined. The second-hand furniture held together with hope and duct tape. The medical equipment clustered around the bed where Tobias slept. The stack of bills on the table she couldn't afford to pay. The entire architecture of poverty she had been living in while cleaning floors and serving coffee. "This is where you've been living," Constantine said, and it wasn't a question. "While working 3 jobs, while taking care of your brother, while being brilliant enough to outthink my entire security team." Tobias stirred and opened his eyes, confused at finding a stranger in their apartment. "Sarah, who is this?" "Tobias, this is Constantine Ravencroft, my employer. Constantine, this is my brother." Constantine walked to the bed and extended his hand. "I've heard a great deal about you. Your sister speaks of you with more pride than most people feel about their greatest accomplishments." Tobias shook his hand weakly, studying Constantine with the perceptiveness of someone who had spent too much time in hospitals watching people. "You're the one who paid for my surgery. Sarah didn't tell me, but I figured it out. Thank you. You saved my life." "Your sister saved your life by refusing to give up on you. I just provided resources." They talked for a few minutes, Constantine asking about Tobias's recovery and his plans for when he was fully healed. Then exhaustion claimed Tobias again, and he drifted back to sleep, leaving Serafina and Constantine standing in the kitchen area, barely large enough for 2 people. "I don't want to marry Vivian," Constantine said finally, his voice raw with emotion he had been suppressing for weeks. "I've tried to find legal ways out of the contract, tried to negotiate alternatives, but her family holds too much leverage. If I break the engagement, they'll align with rival organizations and start a war that will cost hundreds of lives." "Then you have to marry her. Duty comes before personal happiness. You taught me that." "I never taught you that. I learned it, and it's made me miserable for 11 years. I don't want you to learn the same lesson." He reached out and touched her face, gentle as handling glass. "Tell me you feel nothing for me. Tell me this distance is real and not something you're forcing yourself to maintain. Give me that much honesty." Serafina looked into those steel blue eyes and knew she couldn't lie. She had spent her whole life pursuing truth through mathematics, finding patterns that revealed reality beneath surface deceptions. Now a man was asking for the same honesty she gave to numbers, and she couldn't deny him. "I can't tell you that," she whispered, "because it would be a lie, and I've never been good at lying." Constantine's expression cracked, years of careful control shattering like ice under pressure. "Then why are you pulling away from me? Why are you acting like we're strangers when we both know what this is between us?" "Because you're getting married in 3 days. Because loving you is pointless and painful and will only make everything worse. Because I need to protect what's left of my heart before you destroy it completely by standing at an altar with someone else." "What if I don't go through with it? What if I break the contract and deal with the consequences?" Serafina thought about Damien's threat, about Tobias sleeping peacefully 10 feet away, about Tatiana's coup that would kill Constantine if he made himself vulnerable by breaking alliances. She thought about all the reasons she couldn't tell him the truth, and forced herself to say the only thing that might push him away. "Your world isn't mine. You kill people, Constantine. You traffic in violence and fear. I've spent 3 weeks pretending I can live with that, but I can't. The money you paid for Tobias's surgery is probably blood money from some operation that hurt innocent people. Every dollar I touch is stained with someone else's suffering, and I hate myself for accepting it." The words cut him visibly. And Serafina hated herself more for the lie than she had for any of the things she'd actually done. Constantine stepped back, his face closing like shutters dropping over windows. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for your honesty. I won't trouble you again with my inappropriate feelings." He left without another word, and Serafina sank onto her kitchen chair and buried her face in her hands. She had just destroyed the only real connection she'd felt in years, and she'd done it to save his life from a threat he didn't know existed. 3 days later, Serafina stood in the service entrance of the Crystal Ballroom, wearing a catering uniform and watching the wealthiest, most dangerous people in the Pacific Northwest arrive for Constantine's engagement party. The venue was spectacular, all soaring ceilings and chandeliers that threw rainbow light across marble floors. A string quartet played while servers circulated with champagne and appetizers that cost more per plate than Serafina used to earn in a week. She had volunteered to work the party rather than attend as a guest, needing the barrier of professional distance to survive watching the man she loved celebrate his engagement to someone else. Vivian was radiant in a silver gown that probably cost 6 figures, greeting guests with perfect grace, while Constantine stood beside her looking like a man attending his own funeral. At 8:45 p.m., the dancing began. Constantine and Vivian took the floor for the traditional first dance, and Serafina watched from behind a pillar near the kitchen, holding a tray of champagne glasses she was supposed to be circulating. They moved together with practiced elegance, the perfect couple performing for an audience that believed the fiction. But Serafina saw the tension in Constantine's shoulders, the way his smile never reached his eyes, the careful distance he maintained even while holding his fiancé. She decided then that she would resign tomorrow. She couldn't continue working for Ravencroft Industries, couldn't spend years watching Constantine build a life with Vivian, while she slowly died inside from proximity to something she couldn't have. Tobias was stable now. The experimental treatment was working, and she could find another job that paid enough to manage his ongoing care. She would disappear from Constantine's world as completely as she had entered it. But then her mathematical mind caught something wrong. It started with the security positions. She had memorized the standard deployment pattern from weeks of observing how Kieran arranged protection for high-value events. There should be guards at 8 specific points around the ballroom perimeter. Instead, there were only 5, and they were positioned wrong, clustered too close together in a way that left gaps in coverage. Then she noticed the catering staff rotations. Service teams were supposed to rotate every 20 minutes to maintain fresh energy and avoid fatigue. But the same 6 servers had been working continuously for 90 minutes, their faces unfamiliar from any previous events she had attended. They moved with precision that felt military rather than hospitality trained. Finally, she noticed the guest list anomalies. 3 men standing near the bar entrance didn't match the wealthy criminal elite who filled the rest of the room. Their suits were expensive, but ill-fitting. Their body language wrong, too alert and focused like soldiers on a mission rather than guests at a party. 50 seconds. That was all it took for the pattern to resolve in her mind, with the same crystalline clarity she had experienced in the diner 3 months earlier. The security gaps positioned to create kill zones, the catering staff who were actually operatives, the guests who weren't guests at all, but assassins, integrated into the event. The timing designed to coincide with Constantine's most visible, vulnerable moment. This wasn't an engagement party, it was a trap. A carefully orchestrated massacre designed to eliminate Constantine while he was distracted by celebration, surrounded by allies who would die in the crossfire. Tatiana and Vivian had planned this together, using the party as cover to stage their coup and install a new regime built on Constantine's corpse. Serafina's eyes found Damien across the ballroom. He was watching the room with barely concealed anticipation, his hand resting under his jacket, where she knew a weapon waited. Then she saw Tatiana speaking quietly with one of the fake servers, giving instructions with subtle hand signals. The attack would happen soon. Minutes, not hours. Serafina abandoned her tray and started pushing through the crowd toward Constantine, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to warn him before the shooting started, before everyone in this ballroom died, because she had stayed silent to protect her brother. Serafina made it 3 steps before a hand clamped around her arm with crushing force. She turned and found Damien beside her, his smile pleasant, but his eyes promising violence. He leaned close, speaking quietly enough that no one nearby could hear over the music and conversation. "You solved the puzzle, didn't you? I can see it on your face. That same expression you had when you found Tatiana's embezzlement. You're so predictably brilliant, it's almost boring." "Let me go." Serafina tried to pull free, but his grip tightened until she felt bones grinding together. "You don't have to do this. Whatever they're paying you isn't worth killing all these people." "You're right, it's not about money. It's about finally being in charge instead of taking orders from someone who inherited power instead of earning it." He started pulling her toward a service door, maintaining his pleasant expression so that any guests who glanced their way would see nothing unusual. Just a security chief escorting a wayward server somewhere appropriate. They moved through the kitchen where actual catering staff worked in oblivious efficiency, then down a concrete stairwell that descended into the building's basement. The sounds of the party faded with each step until only their footsteps echoed in the cold space. At the bottom, Damien shoved her through a metal door into a storage room that smelled like damp concrete and old fear. Tatiana and Vivian waited inside. Tatiana leaned against a support pillar, wearing a dress the color of fresh blood, looking elegant and deadly as a viper. Vivian stood beside her in her silver gown, and the similarity of their expressions was startling. Both women wore the same predatory smile, the same anticipation of violence satisfied. They had been planning this together for years, perfecting their performance while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "The clever little analyst," Tatiana said, her voice carrying the faint accent of old money and older cruelty. "Damien said you would figure it out eventually. Your problem is you're too smart for your own survival." "Constantine trusts you," Serafina said, addressing Tatiana. "Your family, his brother's widow." His brother was weak, just like Constantine, both of them sentimentalists who let emotion compromise business decisions. "When my husband died, I saw an opportunity to rebuild this organization properly, without the softness that's made us vulnerable." Tatiana pushed off the pillar and circled Serafina like something evaluating prey. "But Constantine has certain offshore accounts that only he can access. Passwords stored in that paranoid brain of his that he refuses to write down or share with anyone." "Except you," Vivian added. "He told you the passwords 3 weeks ago when you were restructuring the security protocols for international transfers. We checked the server logs. You're the only other person with access to those accounts containing approximately $900 million. "I don't remember the passwords," Serafina lied. Tatiana laughed, and the sound echoed off concrete walls like breaking glass. "You remember every number you've ever seen. Damien did background research on you, photographic memory for mathematical data. You could probably recite every transaction you've analyzed in 3 months of working for us. She nodded to Damien. Make her remember. The first blow caught Serafina across the face, snapping her head sideways and filling her mouth with blood. The second hit her stomach, doubling her over as air exploded from her lungs. She crumpled to the concrete floor, gasping, tasting copper and fear. The passwords, Vivian said, crouching beside her with perfect poise despite the violence. Give them to us, and this stops. Refuse, and we have all night to change your mind. Serafina thought about Constantine upstairs, surrounded by enemies, walking into a massacre because she had stayed silent. She thought about Tobias recovering in his apartment, finally healthy, finally having a future. She thought about her mother dying because they couldn't afford proper treatment, about her father killed for $73, about every time life had demanded she choose between impossible options. No, she whispered through broken lips. Kill me if you want, but I won't betray him. Damien kicked her in the ribs, and something cracked with a sound like a branch snapping. Pain exploded through her chest, white and absolute, and she screamed before she could stop herself. He kicked her again, same place, and she felt another rib break. Tears streamed down her face, but she bit down on her tongue to keep from screaming again. 3 floors above them, Kieran was scanning the ballroom with the paranoid attention that had kept Constantine alive for 8 years. He tracked guests, monitored security positions, calculated threat angles with automatic precision. Then he noticed Serafina's abandoned champagne tray near a pillar, glasses still full, positioned wrong for any server who actually knew proper technique. He found Constantine near the main entrance, accepting congratulations from a weapons dealer, and spoke quietly in his ear. "Where's Winters?" Constantine's expression shifted from performative pleasure to sharp focus. "She's working catering tonight. Why?" "Because I just found her tray abandoned, and Damien disappeared 7 minutes ago, and the security positions are wrong." Kieran's hand moved to his weapon. "This is a trap. We need to evacuate now." Constantine's eyes swept the ballroom, and suddenly he saw what Serafina had seen. The patterns clicking into place with brutal clarity, the security gaps, the unfamiliar faces. The careful timing. His own engagement party converted into an execution chamber, and he had been too focused on his misery to notice. "Where's Serafina?" His voice was ice and murder. "I don't know, but if Damien took her, she's in the basement. That's his standard location for interrogations." Kieran was already moving, speaking rapidly into his communication device, alerting the few guards he knew were actually loyal. Constantine didn't wait for backup. He pulled the weapon he always carried from his shoulder holster and started pushing through the crowd toward the service entrance. People scattered when they saw his expression, instinct recognizing a predator who had stopped pretending to be civilized. He hit the basement stairs at a run, Kieran 3 steps behind him, and the man who had built an empire on calculated control became the monster his enemies had always feared but never truly believed in. When he kicked open the storage room door and saw Serafina on the concrete floor, blood pooling beneath her, ribs clearly broken, Damien standing over her preparing another kick, something primal and terrible erupted from Constantine's chest. Damien turned and reached for his weapon, but Constantine was faster. 3 shots, center mass, and Damien collapsed against the wall, leaving red smears as he slid to the floor. Tatiana screamed and Kieran's gun spoke once, a clean shot through her heart that silenced her forever. Vivian ran for the far exit, but Constantine was already there, blocking her escape with eyes emptier than death. Vivian ran for the far exit, but Constantine was already there, blocking her escape with eyes emptier than death. "You planned this with Tatiana," he said, his voice so quiet it was more terrifying than shouting. "You were going to kill me at our own engagement party and take everything I built." Vivian's mask of elegance cracked, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "You were always going to choose that waitress over duty. I saw the way you looked at her, like she mattered more than alliances that took decades to build. You made yourself weak, Constantine. Weak men don't deserve to rule." "You're right about one thing. I was going to choose her. I am choosing her." He lowered his weapon and stepped aside. "Run. Leave Portland tonight and never come back. If I see you again, I won't hesitate a second time." Vivian fled through the exit, heels clicking frantically against concrete, and disappeared into the night. Constantine turned away from her without another glance and dropped to his knees beside Serafina. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and pained, blood staining her catering uniform. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I knew about the coup. Damien threatened to buy us if I told you. I was trying to protect you both, and I failed at everything." "You didn't fail." Constantine gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of her broken ribs. "You saved my life by figuring out the trap. You saved everyone in that ballroom." He looked at Kieran. "Call the ambulance. Tell them we have critical injuries and to come to the basement entrance, not the main doors. And clear out Tatiana's people from upstairs before they realize the coup failed." Kieran nodded and disappeared, speaking rapidly into his phone. Constantine held Serafina and felt her blood soaking into his shirt, warm and terrifying. "Stay with me. You don't get to solve my impossible problem and then leave before seeing how it ends." "How does it end?" Her voice was fading, consciousness slipping away from pain and shock. "With you and me. However you want it to end." The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes. Paramedics stabilized Serafina's breathing and loaded her onto a stretcher, while Constantine refused to let go of her hand. He rode with her to the hospital, ignoring Kieran's suggestions that he should stay to manage the chaos at the Crystal Ballroom. Kieran could handle the cleanup. Constantine had more important things to do than play kingpin while the woman he loved fought for her life. Serafina woke 36 hours later in a private hospital room so luxurious it looked more like a hotel suite than medical facility. Constantine was asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers, his face showing exhaustion that spoke of days without rest. When she stirred, he woke instantly, those blue eyes focusing on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Tobias?" she asked immediately. "Safe. Kieran has guards watching him around the clock. No one will touch your brother ever again, I promise you that." Constantine stood and sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to jostle her injuries. "You have 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and more bruises than I can count. The doctor says you'll recover fully, but you need 6 weeks of rest minimum." The engagement party. "What happened after we left?" "Kieran neutralized Tatiana's operatives. Turns out when you kill the leaders of a coup, the foot soldiers lose enthusiasm quickly. We identified 17 people involved in the conspiracy. Most are dead. The rest are gone from Portland permanently." He paused. "I ended the engagement. Publicly, in front of every criminal boss in the Pacific Northwest. I told them the marriage was canceled, the alliance with the Ashford family was terminated, and anyone who had a problem with my decision could take it up with me personally. That will start a war. Maybe. Or maybe they'll respect strength more than tradition. Either way, I'm done making decisions based on what my father wanted instead of what I want. He traced her cheek with gentle fingers. I want you, Serafina, not as an employee, not as a political convenience, but as the person I build a life with, if you'll have me. 3 months later, after Serafina had fully healed and Tobias had completed his experimental treatment with remarkable success, Constantine took them both to a building in downtown Portland's industrial district. It was an old factory, empty for decades, but Constantine had purchased it and begun renovations. Blueprints covered a table near the entrance, showing plans for a research and education center. This will be the Evangeline Winters Foundation for Gifted Youth, Constantine said, showing Serafina the designs. A place where brilliant kids from poverty can access resources, tutoring, scholarships, and mentorship. No one should have to sacrifice their dreams because they can't afford to pursue them. Serafina looked at the blueprint showing classrooms, computer labs, study spaces, and felt tears streaming down her face. You're naming it after my mother. She raised someone extraordinary while fighting impossible odds. That deserves to be remembered. He pulled a small box from his pocket and knelt on the dusty floor of the empty factory, surrounded by blueprints and possibility. I'm not asking you to marry a mafia boss. I'm asking you to marry a man who's trying to be better than he was. A man who wants to build things instead of just breaking them. A man who loves you more than he thought he could love anything. Serafina Winters, will you marry me? She said yes through tears and laughter, and when he slipped the ring onto her finger. Tobias cheered from where he'd been watching near the entrance. 1 year later, Serafina stood in front of a classroom at the Evangeline Winters Foundation, teaching advanced mathematics to 40 students who looked at her like she had handed them keys to locked doors. The foundation had opened 6 months earlier and was already transforming lives, giving kids who society had overlooked the chance to become everything their brilliance deserved. After class, she returned to the office she shared with Constantine on the building's second floor. He was reviewing architectural plans for a second location while their 8-month-old daughter slept in a bassinet near his desk. The nursery walls were decorated with mathematical equations and fairy tale illustrations, a perfect blend of who they both were. Constantine looked up when she entered and smiled, the real smile he saved only for her and their daughter. How was class? Perfect. Absolutely perfect. She leaned down to kiss him, then looked at their sleeping child. Do you ever regret it? Leaving the empire behind, choosing this life instead? Every morning I wake up next to you. I thank whatever force in the universe gave me the wisdom to choose right for once. He pulled her onto his lap carefully. The empire still exists, just smaller and cleaner. But this, what we built together, this matters more than anything I did before. The monster had learned to be human. The genius had learned to be loved. And the 50-second solution had become a lifetime of building instead of breaking, of choosing love over duty, of proving that redemption was possible even for those who thought they were beyond saving. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.